Also today, the Prime Minister has, well, shut down any hope of special ministerial intervention to allow a Tamil family facing deportation to remain in Australia. This couple from Sri Lanka came to Australia on two separate boats in 2012 and 2013. This was before offshore processing was re-established. Now, they've had two little girls since being here in Australia, and they've settled in the central Queensland town of Biloela. The community there want them to stay, and they've been campaigning for years for that to happen. There have also been some powerful conservative voices, not just refugee advocates, but conservatives who agree this family's earned the right to stay. Now, amongst them, Barnaby Joyce and Alan Jones. But here's the problem. Their asylum claims have been rejected at every turn. This case has gone all the way to the High Court, and this couple's not been found to be deserving of protection as refugees, nor have the children been entitled to refugee... excuse me. Let's have a listen to the crab. I'll get a glass of water.
Now, at a time when there are increasing push factors coming out of Sri Lanka, the worst possible thing you could do was to send a decision, send a message which said, you know what, if you come illegally to Australia and the courts say you don't have a claim and the government say you don't have a claim, then the government just might make an exception because there's been a public reaction. Now, that's not how you run strong borders. So I do understand the real feeling about this and the desire for there to be an exception, but I know what the consequences are of allowing those exceptions. They can return to Sri Lanka and they can make an application to come to Australia under the same processes as everyone else anywhere else in the world. And I would hope they do. I would hope they do.
The Prime Minister there, it's OK, I'm still alive, glass of water fixes everything. The children, as I say, have not been found to be refugees or entitled to citizenship here, at least not yet. The case of the youngest daughter, this is the 2-year-old, is still being determined. The federal court on Friday determined her case had not been properly assessed by the department, and so an injunction was put in place. It means they can't be deported, the entire family, until Wednesday afternoon at the earliest. In the meantime, they've been flown over the weekend to Christmas Island, where it appears they are the only occupants of the immigration facility there, well away from any of the protesters or any of the lawyers trying to help them. Now, the government points out some 1,500 Tamil asylum seekers have also had their claims rejected and have been sent back home to Sri Lanka over the past 6 years. So as you heard Scott Morrison saying there, yes, a concession that people do have strong feelings about this family, but a forceful argument they should not be entitled to stay. Many others have not. Why should they? This is the wrong time to send what he believes would be the wrong message. You heard him also refer there in that clip we played to push factors from Sri Lanka. Now, that's an interesting phrase, a suggestion there is something going on in Sri Lanka pushing asylum seekers to hop on boats and make a perilous journey to Australia. He's not suggesting these Tamils are necessarily justified in fleeing Sri Lanka. That would be a big thing for him to say. But the reference he's made there to push factors is interesting. He didn't talk about pull factors here in Australia, like the Medivac laws that the government is hoping to repeal. Now, we often hear the government make the point the Prime Minister did there, that if we let this one family stay, it will encourage others to come. Refugee advocates make the fair point that this family, of course, arrived before Operation Sovereign Borders was put in place. Anyone who's arrived since then, since late 2013, well, they get sent to Nauru or Manus Island. Or in the case of those from Sri Lanka, they typically get put on a plane straight back home to Sri Lanka. But it's also true that people smugglers will use any sign of a more compassionate policy approach in Australia to sell their product to desperate people. Labor, however, reckons the Immigration Minister, David Coleman, should use his discretionary powers, which he does have, to allow this family to stay. Now, it's joined the community push for compassion here, and this isn't without some political risk for Labor. Labor went to great pains before the election, you'll remember, to suggest that it was in lockstep with the government when it came to offshore processing, when it came to boat turnbacks as well. Now, it's offering a softer line on this family anyway. Does this mean Labor believes all Tamil asylum seekers should be allowed to stay? Well, no. Shadow Minister Christina Keneally says there are a couple of special factors here. The community support, she says, is one. That town, Billawheeler, want this family to stay. That needs to be factored in. She also says, along with that, it's the time that this family have been allowed to stay in the country so far.
In a democracy, the government are responsive to the people. And in this case, the Australian people are speaking loudly right across this country that they want this family to stay. And there is something that you might call the moral duty of time. That is that because they have been allowed to stay here for so long, because the Department of Home Affairs isn't able to process applications efficiently, that this family has been allowed to create roots and to contribute. And they are contributing.
So clearly the message to other asylum seekers who've been in Australia for a while now, awaiting a decision, head to a small town, build some community support, that might help. Well, the government's having none of that. Christine Keneally also sought to push another button with the Prime Minister here, invoking his Christian faith as a reason why he should let this Tamil family stay.
It is time that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, show some compassion, show some Christian leadership, and listen to the Australian people. The Prime Minister has often spoken in the past about his Christian faith, and I have applauded him for doing that. Alan Jones said today that the Prime Minister could show some practical Christianity, and I endorse that call.
Labor's Joel Fitzgibbon made a similar point as well, in fact accusing Scott Morrison of hypocrisy here. Someone who likes to preach, he said, should do the Christian thing and allow this family to stay. But here again, if the Prime Minister is supposed to let this family stay because it's the Christian thing to do, would it not also be the Christian thing to let thousands of other families stay? Where would it be Christian to draw the line? Is agreeing to the policy of boat turnbacks at sea, as Labor has done, a Christian approach as well? This is a difficult policy space, always has been, particularly if we're going to bring a politician's religion into it. Meanwhile, the government chose to release news today of this boat carrying 13 Sri Lankan asylum seekers that was intercepted near the Cocos Islands nearly 4 weeks ago. This was the 6th boat from Sri Lanka since May, and all on board were returned to the country. Scott Morrison, who once refused to release information about so-called on-water matters, is now very open about why he's deciding to release this information now.
We've followed a practice that we have in the past, and I think that keeps the issue of the ever-present threat of illegal arrivals to Australia foremost in the public's mind.
Well, the government needs to get clear. What is their policy on releasing this kind of information? Are they going to do it regularly? Are they going to make regular reports to Parliament? Is this a change in policy from the Prime Minister? Or is he just doing what marketing and ad men do, which is manipulate information to try and manipulate the Australian public?
Well, if there are more boats, the government is going to be sure to make sure the public knows about it, particularly as it tries to argue the case for a tougher approach on asylum seekers in regards to the Medivac laws, and of course along the way tries to paint Labor as being weak on border protection.